Julian grabbed my forearm. His grip was tight enough to bruise. He pulled me through the crowded resort atrium straight toward Marcus Sterling. Marcus was not just a guest. He was the bride's father and a billionaire. Julian stopped in front of him with a smug grin. "Mr. Sterling," Julian said, "this is my sister Stella. She is our family failure. Does taxes in a cubicle somewhere." My mother Diane stepped up right beside him, laughing a high, nervous sound. "We do not brag about her," she said. I stood there staring at the marble floor. I did not fight back. I let them hand me over like a joke. Marcus Sterling turned. He held a secured tablet in his hand. He looked at Julian, then he looked at me. He stopped breathing. The ambient noise of 200 high society guests seemed to mute. Marcus ignored my brother. He stepped toward me. His voice dropped to a low echo. "So it is you." This is unexpected. To understand how my brother accidentally confessed to a federal crime at his own wedding, we have to rewind 3 months. Welcome to a lane of vengeance, where toxic family secrets meet the light of day. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your family, tell me your age in the comments and let me know you are listening. Hit subscribe so you do not miss the fallout. I am Stella Ward. I'm 32 years old. I live in Overland Park, Kansas, and I am a forensic auditor. I track missing money for a living. To my family, I am just a glorified calculator. Julian is 2 years younger. He is the golden child, a flashy wealth manager who drives leased sports cars. When we were growing up, I sat at the kitchen table doing his algebra homework while my parents praised his raw brilliance. I did the work, he took the bow. That was the Ward family rule. 3 months before the wedding, the invitation arrived in my mailbox. It was heavy cardstock, gold foil lettering. It listed Julian and his fiancée, Harper Sterling. I traced my thumb over the calligraphy. The envelope was addressed to Stella Ward. Just Stella. There was no +1. My partner Liam had been in my life for 4 years. He is a high school history teacher. He is grounded. He knows how to calm my mind when a case keeps me up until 3 in the morning. My parents knew him well. They just chose to erase him. I picked up my phone and called my mother. She answered on the second ring. Her voice carried the fake warmth she reserved for people she wanted off the phone quickly. I asked about the missing name. Diane let out a long breath into the receiver. "We have a strict head count, Stella," she said. "Julian is marrying into the Sterlings. We cannot have your little boyfriend taking up a $500 plate." Her words hung in the quiet of my living room. $500. That was the price tag she placed on my 4-year relationship. I kept my tone level. I told her if Liam was not welcome, then I would stay home. Silence stretched over the line. She did not want me there, but she also did not want to explain my absence to her wealthy new in-laws. "Fine," Diane finally snapped. "Bring him, but keep him in the back. Do not embarrass us, Stella." She hung up. I set the phone on the counter. The gold-foiled invitation sat next to it, reflecting the overhead kitchen light. It felt like a warning. I forced them to include Liam. But I knew the fight was not over. It had just begun. The drive to the Kansas City Country Club took 40 minutes. I spent 39 of them staring out the passenger window, watching the streetlights blur. Liam drove in silence. He wore a charcoal suit he bought for a teaching conference 3 years ago. He looked handsome. He looked real. The country club loomed at the end of a private drive flanked by ancient oak trees. It was a fortress of ivy and old money designed to keep certain people out. Tonight, I was one of those people. We handed the keys to a valet in a crisp uniform and stepped into the grand foyer. The air smelled of roasted garlic, expensive floral arrangements, and floor wax. A brass easel stood near the coat check holding a seating chart printed on thick parchment. Gold ink listed the guests alphabetically. I ran my index finger down the S column. Sterling, Sterling, Sterling. Then the W column. Ward. I scanned for table 1. My parents were seated there. Julian was there. Harper was there. My finger trailed down the numbers. Table 12, the very last number on the board. We navigated a maze of silk-draped chairs and crystal centerpieces. Table 12 sat flush against the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen. Every few minutes, a waiter barged through carrying trays of empty glasses. A rush of hot, damp air hit the back of my neck each time the doors opened. Our table mates were already seated. 5 of Julian's former fraternity brothers. They were loud. They wore tailored suits tight across the shoulders and were 3 rounds deep into the bourbon on the table. They laughed over each other, drowning out the string quartet playing in the far corner. Liam did not sigh. He did not point out the insult. He simply pulled out my chair, bumped his shoulder against mine, and poured me a glass of iced water. He was my anchor in a room built to make me feel adrift. From my vantage point in the shadows, I watched the head table. Harper Sterling sat at the center of the room. She radiated cold authority. Light from the crystal chandeliers caught the diamonds wrapping her throat. It was not inherited jewelry. It was new, blinding, and heavy. A server leaned in to refill her water glass. His elbow brushed the back of her chair. Harper snapped her head around. Her lips thinned into a hard line. She waved her hand, dismissing the young man with a dramatic roll of her eyes. I watched her whisper something to Julian. Julian immediately glared at the server, nodding in agreement with his fiancé. Harper looked like a woman who enjoyed her power. She looked like the architect of this entire social hierarchy. It was a perfect illusion. I did not know yet that she was just another piece on the board. I watched her sip her champagne and wondered how much of this evening her father was funding. The sharp clink of a silver spoon against a crystal flute cut through the chatter. Julian stood up. He wore a custom tuxedo that fit too well for a man 3 years out of business school. The room quieted. Julian smiled, flashing teeth that cost our parents thousands in orthodontia. He raised his glass to the Sterlings, thanking them for blending their legacy with ours. Then he turned his attention to our parents. He called my father a titan of regional logistics. Richard Ward managed a mid-sized trucking depot until his retirement. Julian called my mother a philanthropic visionary. Diane Ward organized a church bake sale 2 weekends a year. The lies poured out of his mouth, smooth and rehearsed. He was selling a version of our family that did not exist. He was packaging a fantasy for his new billionaire in-laws. Then his eyes scanned the room, hunting for me. He found me by the kitchen doors. He grinned. He leaned into the microphone, and to my sister Stella, he said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling, keeping us grounded in reality, "She does taxes in a cubicle somewhere. Let us hope she learns how to balance a checkbook before the wedding." The country club erupted in laughter. 200 people I had never met chuckled at my expense. My mother smiled and shook her head, playing the part of the exasperated parent dealing with a disappointment. My father looked down at his plate, avoiding my gaze. The heat of humiliation crept up the back of my neck. I kept my face blank. I refused to give them the reaction they craved. Under the heavy linen tablecloth, Liam slid his hand over mine. His palm was warm. His fingers laced through mine and squeezed, a steady, silent pressure. He did not tell me it was going to be okay. He just let me know I was not alone. Dessert arrived. Small plates of tiramisu and spun sugar. The rigid seating arrangement broke apart as guests began to mingle. I stepped away from table 12, needing oxygen. The hallway leading to the powder rooms was lined with dark mahogany paneling. I found Diane standing near a tall floral arrangement, holding a glass of sparkling water. She was talking to Harper's aunt. Diane wore a silver beaded gown that cost more than her first car. She was complaining, not about the heat or the catering. She was complaining about a bank. "It is just endless paperwork." Diane sighed, waving her manicured hand. "A glitch in our mortgage statement. The bank sent some intimidating letter about a missed payment. Pure incompetence. We have lived in that house for 30 years. The aunt nodded politely and excused herself to find the restroom. I stepped forward. Diane stiffened. Her easy smile vanished. I kept my voice low. I told her I heard her mention a bank error. I offered to look at the statement for her. I reminded her I handled complex financial audits every single day. Resolving a standard bank glitch would take me 10 minutes. Diane looked at me as if I had offered to scrub the country club floor. She sneered. Her eyes darted around the hallway to ensure no Sterlings were in earshot. "Julian is handling it," she snapped. Her tone was sharp and final. "He understands high finance. You just stick to your little spreadsheets, Stella. Do not meddle in things above your pay grade." She turned her back on me and walked toward the ballroom, leaving me alone in the corridor. I spent my days hunting anomalies, a transposed number on a balance sheet, a shell company registered to a vacant lot. My job was to find the cracks in the facade and wedge them open until the truth fell out. I knew how liars operated. They always built elaborate stories to cover simple mistakes. Diane calling a missed payment a glitch was a classic deflection tactic. Banks do not glitch on mortgages. They execute automated algorithms. If a letter is generated, a payment was missed, period. Richard was meticulous about his bills. He kept a physical ledger on his desk and paid everything 2 weeks early. The idea of him missing a mortgage payment was impossible. Unless he was not the one making the payments anymore. I stood there in the quiet hallway. I took the insult. I let it wash over me. But my professional instincts began to hum, a low, steady vibration in the back of my mind. A fixed-rate home mortgage is the simplest financial instrument in existence. You pay the principal, you pay the interest. There is no high finance involved. It is basic arithmetic. My parents paid off their home a decade ago. Why would a bank send a missed payment letter on a cleared asset? And more importantly, why would a supposedly brilliant wealth manager need to step in and handle a basic household banking error? Wealth managers deal in offshore equities and trust portfolios. They do not field customer service calls for local credit unions unless there is a fire they need to put out. A thread pulled loose in my brain. I stared at the closed ballroom doors. I wondered what my brother was actually doing with our parents' money. The text message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon while I was reviewing a quarterly earnings report. It lit up my phone screen, pulling my focus from the rows of black numbers. The message was from Diane. It was brief and contained a suspicious level of manufactured casualness. "Hey, Stella," she wrote. "Just wanted to finalize details for the rehearsal dinner next week. Harper decided on a casual backyard barbecue theme. Super relaxed. Just wear jeans and a nice top. See you there." I read the message twice. I let the phone rest on my desk. A backyard barbecue for a rehearsal dinner. It was a plausible choice for many families. It was not a plausible choice for a family actively trying to impress a billionaire patriarch. Harper Sterling wore diamonds to a country club engagement dinner. She rolled her eyes at waitstaff. She did not strike me as a woman who would serve pulled pork on paper plates the night before her society wedding. My parents operated on a system of calculated exclusion. They never explicitly banned me from their events. Instead, they constructed scenarios where my presence would be a source of constant, low-grade humiliation. It was a strategy designed to make me self-select out of their lives. I remembered my high school graduation. Diane told me the ceremony started an hour later than it actually did. I walked across the stage to a row of empty folding chairs. They arrived just as the auditorium emptied. Diane blamed traffic. Julian got a private dinner at a steakhouse for his graduation. I got a rushed apology in a parking lot. This text message felt exactly like that parking lot. It was a setup. She wanted me to walk into a room of tailored suits and silk dresses, wearing denim. She wanted me to embody the punchline Julian delivered at the country club: the messy sister, the family failure. I picked up my phone and did not reply. Instead, I opened my web browser. I searched for Julian and Harper's wedding registry. It took me less than 3 minutes to find their custom-built wedding website. A pop-up window blocked the homepage, demanding a guest password. Diane had conveniently neglected to provide this to me during our numerous logistical phone calls. I stared at the password prompt. Most people use predictable patterns: birthdays, anniversaries, pet names. I typed Harper and Julian. Incorrect. I typed Sterling Wedding. Incorrect. I thought about my brother's towering ego. I typed Julian weds Harper. The screen unlocked. The homepage loaded, revealing a looping video of the couple running through a vineyard. I clicked on the Events tab. I scrolled past the welcome brunch and the main ceremony details. I found the rehearsal dinner. The location was an upscale botanical garden pavilion known for its imported orchids and strict jacket-required policy. The stated dress code on the website was clear: black tie, optional. A cold calm washed over me. I leaned back in my office chair. Diane had deliberately lied to me. She was attempting to orchestrate my public humiliation to cement the narrative she and Julian were selling. If I confronted her with the website screenshot, she would gaslight me. She would claim she sent the wrong message or that the plans changed at the last minute and she simply forgot to update me. Confrontation gave her control. Silence gave me power. I closed the web browser. I did not text her back. I decided right then I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me break a sweat. I was going to walk into that botanical garden pavilion, and I was going to look like I belonged there. My lunch break was 45 minutes long. I left my office building and drove straight to a boutique downtown. I bypassed the racks of bright synthetic fabrics and headed for the evening wear. I knew exactly what I needed. Not something flashy, not something covered in cheap sequins. I needed armor. I found it tucked in the back corner of the store, an evening gown the color of deep forest moss. The emerald fabric was heavy silk crepe. It featured a high boat neckline, long sleeves, and a sharp architectural cut that draped perfectly. It was austere. It was elegant. Emerald is the color of clarity. It is the color of hard truths and quiet wealth. I purchased the dress without looking at the price tag. I hung it in the back of my closet when I got home. I did not mention the text message or the dress to Liam. I let the trap sit undisturbed. My professional life offered a brutal distraction from the impending family circus. I am the lead forensic investigator for a joint corporate task force partnered with federal authorities. We handle high-level, white-collar crime. The kind of theft that happens in boardrooms with fountain pens instead of alleys with crowbars. For the past 6 weeks, my team had been buried under mountains of encrypted data. We were tracking a massive $50 million embezzlement scheme. The victim was a sprawling logistics conglomerate. Due to the strict non-disclosure agreements blinding my lower-level analysts, we referred to the victim company only as Parent Entity A. The structure of the theft was sophisticated. The perpetrators were routing funds through a labyrinth of offshore accounts before washing the clean cash back into domestic shell companies. My days were spent staring at wire transfer logs and parsing dense legal incorporation documents. I tracked IP addresses bouncing from the Cayman Islands to server farms in Eastern Europe. The syndicate was careful. They used dummy directors and layered liability shields to obscure the true beneficiaries. It was a ghost hunt. I sifted through thousands of transactions looking for the single human error that would bring the entire structure down. A misspelled name, a duplicated address, a reused tax identification number. Every criminal organization eventually gets lazy. They get comfortable and they make a mistake. My job was to be the person watching when they did. I sat in my home office late into the night. The glow of my dual monitors painted the dark room pale blue. I ran a cross-reference algorithm on a fresh batch of unmasked dummy corporations provided by federal intelligence. I was looking for domestic nodes. Companies operating inside the United States acting as blind pass-throughs for the stolen money. The progress bar crawled across the screen. I rubbed my tired eyes. The stress of the upcoming wedding and the weight of the investigation were grinding me down. My family demanded my presence only to set me up for ridicule. My job demanded absolute precision while navigating corporate espionage. The two worlds felt entirely separate. A messy personal life and a rigid professional one. The algorithm pinged. A successful match. A domestic node had been flagged receiving frequent, large wire transfers from known offshore shell accounts. I clicked on the file, opening the incorporation documents for the flagged entity. It was a limited liability company registered to a physical address in the Midwest. The company produced no tangible goods. It offered no clear services. It was purely a vessel for moving cash. I flagged the file for deeper review in the morning. I shut down my computer and walked down the hall to the bedroom. Liam was already asleep. The emerald dress hung silently in the closet, waiting for its debut. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. I thought about the black tie optional rehearsal dinner. I pictured the look on my mother's face when her denim trap failed to spring. I had no idea that the spreadsheet sitting on my desk and the wedding waiting at the botanical gardens were about to collide in a spectacular disaster. The doorbell rang at 7 o'clock on a Thursday evening. Liam was in the kitchen chopping bell peppers for dinner. I was on the living room sofa reviewing printed case files. We were not expecting anyone. My duplex was located in a quiet, modest neighborhood 20 miles from the sprawling suburban estates my parents preferred. They rarely visited. The drive was an inconvenience they only endured when they needed something specific. I set my highlighters down and walked to the front door. I checked the peephole. My father, Richard, stood on the concrete porch. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. His shoulders were hunched. He wore his golf windbreaker zipped to his chin, despite the mild evening air. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was doing. He stepped past me into the narrow entryway and stopped right in the middle of my living room rug. Richard Ward was a man who preferred the path of least resistance. He spent his entire career managing logistics for a Midwestern trucking company. He liked schedules. He liked predictability. He avoided conflict by retreating into silence and letting my mother steer the family narrative. He was an enabler of the highest order. He never threw the punches, but he always held the coats. Seeing him standing in my living room alone without Diane dictating his movements was jarring. He looked frantic. A thin sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He rubbed the back of his neck with a trembling hand. "Stella," he said. His voice was tight, strained. "I need your help. It is an emergency." I crossed my arms. I did not offer him a seat. "What kind of emergency requires you to drive across town without calling first?" I asked. He swallowed hard. "It is Julian. The wedding budget. It ballooned. Things got out of hand. There were unexpected vendor fees, overages on the catering contracts. The Sterlings are covering the bulk of it, but Julianne is on the hook for some structural incidentals. The venue requires immediate payment to secure the space for the rehearsal." He stopped talking and looked at me expectantly. I stared back at him. I processed his words through the lens of a forensic auditor. Vendor overages are paid via corporate check or credit card. They leave a digital footprint. They are not handled like a ransom drop. "How much does he need?" I asked. My voice was deliberately flat. Richard avoided eye contact. $15,000, he muttered. "He needs it in cash by tomorrow morning." The request hit the quiet room like a physical blow. $15,000 in liquid cash. It was not a request for a loan. It was a demand for a bailout. A sharp spike of adrenaline hit my bloodstream. I uncrossed my arms. "You want me to hand over $15,000 in untraceable currency to cover a catering overage for a billionaire's wedding? Do you hear how absurd that sounds?" Richard's face flushed. His desperation turned into immediate defensive anger. "It is not absurd, Stella. It is family. You do not have children. You do not have a mortgage on a large estate. You have savings. You owe your brother this." The audacity of his statement was breathtaking. "I owe him this." The phrase echoed in my head. I thought about the student loans I paid off by working double shifts as a junior accountant. I thought about the rusty sedan I drove for 8 years while Julian received a brand new, leased sports car as a graduation present. I thought about the countless times I subsidized their financial priorities with my absence from their checkbook. I did not owe them a single dime. Before I could respond, Liam stepped out of the kitchen. He held a kitchen towel in one hand. His posture was relaxed, but his eyes were sharp. He stood beside me, a quiet, unyielding barrier. "Mr. Ward," Liam said. His voice was calm and even. "If Julian is a successful wealth manager, why does he need a cash injection from a sibling? Surely he has liquid assets or lines of credit to handle a short-term vendor dispute. Cash leaves no receipt. Why does a financial professional need to avoid a paper trail?" Richard glared at Liam. He deeply resented Liam's presence. He resented that Liam saw through the Ward family illusion. "This is family business," Richard snapped. "It does not concern you." Liam did not flinch. "It concerns Stella." "Which means it concerns me." Richard turned his attention back to me. His eyes were wide with panic. He tried to weaponize the guilt Diane usually deployed. "After everything we have done for you, after everything we provided, you are going to let your brother look poor in front of the Sterlings. You are going to let this wedding fall apart over a few $1,000s. He was not asking for help. He was trying to extort my silence and my compliance using the threat of family shame. I looked at the man who stood by and watched my mother relegate me to the shadows for 3 decades. The man who allowed my brother to use me as a punchline to impress his wealthy friends. I felt no pity for him. I felt only a cold, hard clarity. "No," I said. "I will not give you the money. I will not write a check. I will not withdraw cash. Whatever Julian got himself into, he can get himself out of." Richard stared at me. The panic in his eyes morphed into genuine terror. "You do not understand what is at stake here," he whispered. He turned around and walked out the front door. He did not say goodbye. He practically ran to his car. The tires squealed against the asphalt as he sped away from the curb. Liam placed his hand on the small of my back. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew I was processing the interaction. He walked back into the kitchen and resumed chopping the vegetables. I sat back down on the sofa. I picked up my highlighters. My hands were perfectly steady. I stared at the case files spread across my coffee table, but I was not seeing the numbers. My auditor brain locked onto the interaction. It picked apart Richard's narrative and found the structural flaws. $15,000. It is a highly specific number. It falls just above the $10,000 federal reporting threshold for bank withdrawals. If Richard or Diane pulled that much cash from their own accounts, it would trigger an automatic suspicious activity report to the IRS. They needed the money to come from a secondary source to avoid triggering an internal bank audit on their own assets. Furthermore, the Sterling family was notoriously rigid about their public image. If Julian was expected to contribute to the wedding costs, the transaction would be handled by wealth managers communicating with wealth managers. It would be a seamless wire transfer between established trusts. It would not require a panicked father begging for physical cash on a Thursday night. Julian did not need the money for a caterer. He did not need it for a florist. He needed untraceable currency immediately. A man only needs untraceable cash when he is paying someone who operates entirely outside the legal financial system. I thought about Diane's comment in the country club hallway, a glitch in her mortgage statement. I thought about Julian's flashy lifestyle that seemed entirely disproportionate to his actual career trajectory. I thought about the fear radiating off my father. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, watching the ground crumble beneath his boots. The pieces were suspended in the air. They were beginning to drift together, forming a terrifying constellation. Julian was not just spending beyond his means. He was trapped in a financial vice grip. Someone was squeezing him, hard, and he was trying to use my bank account to buy himself a few more days of breathing room. I pulled out my secure work laptop. I decided I was going straight into the belly of the beast. The wedding was only days away. I needed to find out exactly who Julian Ward owed $15,000 to before the entire facade collapsed on top of us. The resort sat on 300 acres of manicured Kansas prairie just past the state line. It was a sprawling compound of limestone and glass designed to separate the wealthy from the rest of the world. We pulled through the wrought iron gates on a Tuesday afternoon 3 days before the ceremony. Valets in beige uniforms swarmed the circular driveway, opening doors for guests stepping out of luxury utility vehicles and imported sedans. Liam parked our 4-year-old car near the back of the temporary loading zone. We carried our own bags. The lobby smelled of cedar wood and expensive citrus perfume. A crystal chandelier the size of a small car hung above a sprawling floral centerpiece. Men in pastel linen suits and women carrying designer leather totes congregated near the concierge desks, drinking complimentary champagne. It was an ecosystem of performative wealth. I walked up to the polished mahogany reception desk. A young clerk with a tight smile typed my name into his terminal. He frowned. He hit the backspace key and typed it again. The smile faltered. He looked at the screen, then looked at my sensible blazer and travel shoes. "Miss Ward," he said, lowering his voice, "it appears your reservation was modified yesterday afternoon." I asked him to clarify. He shifted his weight, looking past my shoulder toward the lobby bar where a group of wedding guests had already gathered. "The primary account holder called to release your suite," he whispered. "Mrs. Ward instructed us to remove you from the family block. She stated you were unable to meet the incidental deposit requirements and would be securing alternative lodging." Unable to meet the deposit requirements. She told a stranger I was broke. It was a surgical strike. Diane waited until we were physically inside the building, surrounded by Julian's affluent social circle, to pull the rug out. She wanted me to argue with the clerk. She wanted me to cause a scene in the lobby, dragging my bags back out to the car in front of Harper's extended relatives. It was the dress code trap escalated to a geographic level. They wanted me exiled. They wanted me humiliated and scrambling to find a motel off the interstate. I did not raise my voice. I did not demand to speak to a manager. I turned to Liam. He had heard every word. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed. The way a teacher looks at a student who repeatedly fails a basic test. "Give me 2 minutes," Liam said. He pulled out his phone. He did not ask me how I wanted to handle it. He just handled it. He tapped the screen a few times, scrolled, and confirmed a transaction. "Grab your suitcase," he told me. "We are going to the lake." We drove 10 miles away from the resort property. The paved highways turned into gravel roads winding through thick patches of oak and hickory trees. We pulled up to a secluded A-frame cabin sitting right on the edge of a quiet reservoir. It had a wraparound wooden deck, a stone fireplace, and 0 cell service interruptions. It was silent. The only sound was the wind moving through the branches. Liam unlocked the front door and carried our bags inside. He walked into the kitchen, found the coffee maker, and started a pot. "Diane thought she was punishing you," he said over the sound of running water. "She actually gave us a vacation. Let them play their games at the hotel." He was right. Diane had orchestrated my physical removal from the epicenter of the wedding chaos. She thought isolating me would break my spirit. She failed to understand that isolation is an auditor's greatest asset. By exiling me to a quiet cabin in the woods, she handed me uninterrupted silence. No forced rehearsal dinners to attend early. No awkward cocktail hours dodging Julian's fraternity brothers. No Diane monitoring my conversations. I had an empty house, strong internet, and a secure federal server waiting for my login credentials. I unpacked my clothes. I changed out of my travel attire and put on comfortable sweatpants. I set my laptop on the heavy oak dining table overlooking the water. I plugged in the encrypted hard drive. For the past several weeks, I had been operating blind. The Joint Corporate Task Force utilized strict compartmentalization. My team analyzed the financial structures of the $50 million embezzlement scheme, but we were walled off from the victim's identity. Parent Entity A, that was the only name we were allowed to use. It prevented insider trading leaks and protected the victim's stock price while the investigation progressed. This morning, the task force director authorized the decryption protocol. The initial phase of the audit was complete. We had successfully traced the stolen funds through the offshore labyrinths and identified the domestic shell companies receiving the washed cash. It was time to unmask the victim and begin serving federal subpoenas. I opened the secure portal. I typed in my 16-character alphanumeric passcode. The two-factor authentication pinged my encrypted secondary device. I approved the login. The loading screen materialized. A gray progress bar filled from left to right. I took a sip of the black coffee Liam set beside my keyboard. The files decrypted. The redaction blocks vanished from the digital documents. The true names of the corporate entities populated the screen. I opened the master ledger for parent entity A. I read the header. I read it a second time. My heart rate slowed to a steady, methodical thump. Parent entity A was Sterling Logistics. Harper's father, Marcus Sterling, the billionaire hosting a $2 million wedding 10 miles down the road, was the victim of the $50 million international syndicate I was currently investigating. The coincidence was too sharp. It defied mathematical probability. I leaned closer to the monitor. If Marcus Sterling was the victim, then the domestic nodes receiving the stolen cash had to be geographically relevant to the syndicate's local operators. The people washing the money were right here in the Midwest. The genre of my week shifted in a single heartbeat. I was no longer dealing with a petty family drama over dinner invitations and missing hotel rooms. I was sitting in the middle of a federal financial thriller. My brother was marrying the daughter of a man whose company had been systematically drained of $50 million. 2 days ago, my father begged me for $15,000 in untraceable cash to cover an urgent wedding expense. A highly specific number that perfectly aligned with the thresholds for shadow banking interest payments. I pulled up the domestic node file I had flagged late Tuesday night, the limited liability company acting as a blind pass-through, the entity receiving frequent wire transfers from Cayman Island accounts. I unmasked the registered agent data. My eyes scanned the lines of text, address, phone number, incorporator name. The breath caught in my throat. I sat back in the wooden chair. The silence of the cabin felt heavy, thick. My family thought they were pushing me away to protect their fragile social climbing. They thought they were keeping me from ruining Julian's big moment. They had no idea they had just locked the lead federal investigator in a room with the exact blueprints of their destruction. What secrets were waiting inside that unmasked domestic shell company folder? The welcome brunch was hosted on the resort's sprawling southern terrace. White linen tents shaded rows of catered buffet tables. A jazz trio played softly near a cascading stone fountain. Liam and I arrived precisely on time. We drove the 10 miles from our quiet cabin back into the teeth of the Ward family machinery. I wore a tailored navy sheath dress. It was professional. It was unapproachable. I walked onto the terrace and immediately located my mother. Diane was holding court near the mimosa station. She spotted me. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second before her social programming kicked in. She offered a tight wave, pretending the hotel eviction had never happened. I did not wave back. I kept walking. Harper Sterling stood at the center of the terrace, surrounded by a tight orbit of bridesmaids and extended family members. She wore a white silk sundress. The morning sun caught the jewelry resting against her collarbone. A cluster of women gasped, offering high-pitched sounds of admiration. Julian stood next to her, his arm draped casually over her waist. He beamed, soaking in the attention. He was playing the role of the generous provider to perfection. I moved closer, navigating the crowd to get a better look at the spectacle. The necklace was a heavy, platinum setting. It featured a thick chain of small pave diamonds leading down to a massive central stone. I stopped walking. My blood turned to ice water. The central diamond was an old mine cut. It possessed a distinctive, slightly asymmetrical facet pattern, unique to gems cut before modern laser technology. It was flanked by 2 tiny sapphire baguettes. I knew that stone. I knew the tiny scratch on the left sapphire. I knew the way it caught the light because I used to stare at it sitting on my grandmother's hand when I was 10 years old. It was not a custom piece Julian commissioned from a high-end jeweler. It was my grandmother's vintage engagement ring pried from its original band and dropped into a new setting. My grandmother passed away when I was 24. She was the only person in the Ward family who did not treat me like a defective spare part. Her will was explicitly clear. She left the house to my father. She left her savings to be split between Julian and me. She left the vintage ring directly to me. A specific, named bequest. When the estate was settled, Diane handed me a check and a rehearsed apology. She claimed the ring vanished during the estate cleanout. She suggested a mover might have pocketed it, or my grandmother might have misplaced it during her final months. I spent weeks searching the empty house. I checked pawn shops. I filed a police report. The ring was gone. Now it was sitting on the chest of a billionaire's daughter, a wedding gift from a man who had never earned an honest dollar in his life. The sheer arrogance of the theft was staggering. Julian did not just steal a piece of jewelry. He stole the last physical connection I had to a woman who actually loved me. He stole it to buy his way into a family that could purchase 100 identical stones without checking a bank balance. I watched him kiss Harper's cheek. He whispered something in her ear, making her laugh. He felt completely invincible. I tapped Liam's arm and tilted my head toward the hallway leading back into the main resort lobby. I needed Julian isolated. I walked off the terrace and stood near a bank of heavy velvet curtains obscuring a service corridor. I waited. 5 minutes later, Julian passed by, heading toward the lobby restrooms. I stepped out, blocking his path. He stopped short. He let out a loud, exasperated breath. "Stella," he said, "please do not start. I am not doing the poor me routine today. Go grab a mimosa and mingle." I stepped closer, forcing him to back up against the floral wallpaper. "Where did you get the center stone for Harper's necklace?" I asked. My voice was a low hum. It did not shake. Julian blinked. The fake smile vanished. He looked up and down the hallway, checking for an audience. When he realized we were alone, his posture shifted. The golden child facade dropped, revealing the sneering bully underneath. "Do not be ridiculous, Stella," he scoffed. I bought it. "It is a custom piece." I told him about the old mine cut. I told him about the scratch on the left sapphire baguette. I recited the exact dimensions listed on the original appraisal document my grandmother kept in her safety deposit box. Julian stared at me. He realized the lie was dead. He did not apologize. He did not look ashamed. He let out a sharp, cruel laugh. "So what if it is the ring?" he said. He leaned against the wall, crossing his arms over his expensive linen jacket. "Mom gave it to me. She knew I needed something spectacular for Harper." "What were you going to do with a rock like that anyway, Stella? Wear it to your desk at H&R Block? Let it sit in a drawer while you count other people's money. It belongs on someone who can actually appreciate it." He admitted the theft with the casual ease of a man discarding a piece of trash. Diane was an accomplice. She orchestrated the lie during the estate cleanout specifically to stockpile the asset for Julian's future use. A hot spike of rage hit the back of my throat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to march out onto the terrace and rip the necklace off Harper's throat. I wanted to burn the entire wedding to the ground. I opened my mouth to speak, but Julian held up a hand. His eyes narrowed. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "Make a scene, Stella," he warned. "Walk out there and cause a problem. See what happens. Mom and I will call the senior partners at your accounting firm on Monday morning. We will tell them you stole cash from the family trust. We will tell them you are unstable. We will file a police report claiming you took the ring. Who do you think they will believe? A respected wealth manager and a retired logistics director, or a junior clerk with a chip on her shoulder? We will ruin your professional reputation overnight." My family was not just toxic. They were extortionists. They operated like a mid-level crime syndicate utilizing threats, theft, and blackmail to enforce compliance. Julian thought he held all the cards. He thought his wealth manager title and his proximity to the Sterlings made him bulletproof. He thought I was just a junior tax clerk terrified of losing a mid-level accounting job. He had no idea I was a federal investigator holding the encrypted blueprints to an international laundering operation. I looked at my brother. I looked at the smug satisfaction settling over his features. He thought he had won. He thought my silence was submission. I let the silence stretch for 5 long seconds. I did not yell. I did not threaten him back. I offered him a tight, polite smile. "You always were the favorite, Gulian," I said softly. I turned around and walked away. I headed back toward the sunlit terrace, leaving him standing alone in the shadows. He thought he crushed my spirit. He did not realize I had just locked the target. How do you destroy a thief who believes he is entirely untouchable? You do not argue with him in a hallway. You let him walk onto a stage he built himself, and you remove the floorboards. The bridal luncheon took place in the resort solarium. It was a sprawling, glass-enclosed greenhouse designed to mimic a Victorian conservatory. Humid air trapped the scent of imported orchids and Earl Grey tea. I sat near the end of a long mahogany table, surrounded by 24 women. Harper sat at the head, wearing a pale yellow silk dress. She unwrapped small, expensive gifts, while the guests offered polite applause. I kept my hands folded in my lap. I watched the room. Diane sat 3 chairs down from me. She had been monitoring my face ever since I returned from the hallway encounter with Julian. She saw the tight set of my jaw. She knew her son well enough to deduce he had confessed the theft of the ring. Diane operated on the principle of preemptive warfare. If a scandal was looming, she scorched the earth before a single spark could catch. She needed to discredit me before I had the opportunity to speak. She waited for a lull in the conversation. The waitstaff circulated, pouring fresh champagne. Diane leaned toward Harper's oldest relatives. Aunt Beatrice and Aunt Clara were women of established wealth who wore genuine pearls and spoke in hushed, measured tones. Diane pitched her voice at the precise volume required to travel down the table. "It breaks my heart." Diane sighed, placing a manicured hand over her collarbone. She looked directly at me with eyes full of manufactured sorrow. Stella has always struggled with Julian finding success. It is a deep, pathological envy. We tried counseling when she was younger. She invents delusions just to pull attention away from his achievements. It is a sickness, really. The table grew quiet. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Eyes shifted toward me. The wealthy aunts offered looks of pity mixed with polite disgust. Harper touched her diamond necklace, the stolen ring, and offered a sympathetic frown. She was playing the gracious bride, enduring a troubled future sister-in-law. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Diane isolated me, changed the narrative, recruited powerful allies, and enforced a false reality, all in 4 sentences. If I raised my voice now, I would only prove her point. If I accused Julian of theft, I would sound exactly like the delusional spinster she just described. I picked up my porcelain teacup. The rim rattled slightly against the matching saucer. I steadied my hand. I took a slow, deliberate sip of the warm tea. I looked directly at Diane. I offered a warm, vacant smile. "You raise an excellent point, Mom," I said. My voice was even and pleasant. Julian has always possessed a singular talent for acquiring things he did not earn. It is truly fascinating to watch. Diane blinked. She searched my face, unsure if I was agreeing with her or insulting him. The wealthy aunts chuckled, finding my apparent self-deprecation charming. The tension evaporated. The conversation resumed. I played the beaten dog to perfection. I let them think the threat was neutralized. The luncheon dragged on for 2 more hours. I survived the forced toasts and the endless parade of imported silk lingerie. When I finally walked out to the gravel parking lot, the afternoon sun felt sharp and clean. Liam was sitting on the hood of our car reading a paperback novel. He closed the book when he saw my posture. He did not ask how the event went. He tossed the book into the back seat and opened the passenger door for me. We drove back to the cabin in a comfortable, unburdened silence. The contrast between the petty social warfare of the resort and the quiet reality of my actual life was striking. I changed into a gray cotton sweater the moment we reached the cabin. I sat at the heavy oak dining table. The secure federal server hummed on my laptop screen. I navigated past the firewall using my biometric key. The case files for the Sterling Logistics embezzlement were organized into dozens of encrypted subfolders. I opened the financial flowcharts my team spent the last 6 weeks building. I needed to trace the exact route the stolen cash took to reach the Midwest. The syndicate operated a sophisticated loop. They generated fake invoices from phantom shipping vendors located in Eastern Europe. Sterling Logistics paid those fraudulent invoices from their corporate accounts. The clean funds vanished into offshore banks in the Caymans and the Isle of Man. The money sat there, cooling off to avoid immediate detection. Then it was routed back into the United States through domestic shell companies pretending to offer high-end business consulting services. This is the integration phase of money laundering. It makes dirty money look like legitimate revenue. My eyes scanned the domestic node identified as Apex Holdings. It was the primary funnel for the washed currency. Over the past 14 months, Apex Holdings received 42 separate wire transfers. The total sum was just over $12 million. The money entered their accounts and was immediately dispersed into dozens of smaller, untraceable crypto wallets. The shell company kept a flat 3% fee for acting as the blind pass-through. 3% of $12 million is $360,000. That was the sudden influx of liquid wealth Julian used to lease his luxury cars and buy his tailored suits. I needed to prove the connection. I accessed the state secretary database to pull the public incorporation records for Apex Holdings. Criminal organizations typically use proxy registered agent services to hide their identities. They hire anonymous lawyers to sign the paperwork. But this syndicate got lazy, or rather, their local asset got greedy. He wanted to save the incorporation filing fees. The PDF document loaded on my monitor. I scrolled down past the boilerplate legal text. Article 1 stated the name of the limited liability company as Apex Holdings. Article 2 required the name and physical address of the registered agent. I stared at the bold black font on the screen. Julian Ward, Suite 400, downtown Overland Park, Kansas. It was the exact address of Julian's wealth management firm, the office my parents bragged about to their country club friends, the office built on a foundation of stolen federal currency. Julian was not a criminal mastermind. He did not engineer the offshore routing protocols. He was a low-level mule, a glorified toll booth operator for a transnational crime ring. They needed a legitimate-looking financial front in the Midwest to receive the large wires without triggering automated banking alarms. Wealth managers handle substantial sporadic deposits every day. Julian's firm was the perfect cover. He let them use his credentials in exchange for a skim off the top. The irony was staggering. He used the dirty money to buy his way into the Sterling family orbit. He dated the daughter of the man his employers were currently robbing. It was an endless loop of sheer stupidity. He brought the stolen cash right back to the victim's dinner table. That blinding arrogance is exactly what tripped the algorithms and triggered Marcus Sterling's internal corporate audit. The internal audit found the bleeding and alerted the federal task force. The federal task force assigned me to lead the forensic accounting team. I sat back in the wooden chair. The sunlight fading over the lake outside cast long shadows across the cabin floor. My mother spent the afternoon convincing a room full of affluent strangers that I was a delusional liar. My brother threatened to ruin my professional career to protect a stolen vintage ring. They thought I was a nuisance they could swat away with social pressure and petty blackmail. They had no idea I held a signed confession to a multi-million-dollar federal crime. The professional investigation and my personal nightmare had merged into a single devastating reality. What do you do when the criminal you are hunting turns out to be your own brother? The glow of the laptop screen cast a harsh blue light across the wooden dining table. I sat alone in the quiet cabin, listening to the distant sound of water lapping against the lakeshore. Liam was asleep in the adjacent bedroom. The physical world around me was still. The digital world inside my monitor was a chaotic web of financial deceit. I had Julian right where I wanted him. The registered agent document proved his wealth management firm was the entry point for the washed currency. But forensic accounting is never just about finding the front door. It is about mapping every single room inside the house. I needed to understand the exact mechanics of his operation before I handed the file over to the federal prosecutors. I poured another cup of black coffee and began tearing Apex Holdings apart, line by line. A typical money mule operates under strict parameters. They receive a wire transfer, take a pre-negotiated percentage for their trouble, and immediately route the remaining balance to the designated destination accounts. It is a volume game. You keep your head down, you act like a quiet toll booth, and you collect your fee. Julian was supposed to collect 3%. I pulled up the primary corporate checking account for Apex Holdings and ran a reconciliation script against the offshore disbursement ledgers. The script calculates the incoming deposits and subtracts the outgoing transfers to verify the profit margin. The progress wheel spun for 20 seconds. The final output generated a glaring red error code. The ledger did not balance. The discrepancy was not a rounding error or a minor banking fee. The numbers were off by hundreds of thousands of dollars. I leaned closer to the high-resolution screen. My eyes scanned the transaction logs. Julian was not just keeping his 3%. He was actively skimming off the top of the syndicated funds. Whenever a particularly large transfer hit his account, he would siphon an additional 4 or 5% before passing the rest down the line. It was an astonishing display of amateur greed. Criminal organizations employ their own auditors. They track every single cent. Julian was stealing from men who do not send strongly worded collection letters. They send people with crowbars. I tracked the unauthorized withdrawals to see where the skimmed money was going. The paper trail was insultingly easy to follow. Julian treated the Apex Holdings corporate account like a personal slush fund. I watched the stolen money flow from the LLC directly into his lifestyle. There was a $40,000 wire sent to a luxury auto dealership. That covered the down payment on the imported sports car he paraded around Overland Park. There was a recurring monthly draft for $3,000. That covered his initiation fees and dues at the Kansas City Country Club, where he humiliated me just a few nights ago. Then I found the wedding expenses. The digital receipts laid out a timeline of desperate social climbing. Julian wired $25,000 to the upscale Botanical Garden Pavilion to secure the rehearsal dinner venue. He drafted another $12,000 to a high-end jeweler in New York. That transaction occurred 3 days after my grandmother passed away. He used the stolen cash to pay a jeweler to pry my inherited diamond from its original setting and mount it into Harper's flashy platinum necklace. He was literally financing his golden child persona with money stolen from an international crime ring. I sat back and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. The sheer stupidity of his actions was hard to process. Julian thought he was the smartest person in the room. He believed his own hype. Diane and Richard spent 3 decades telling him he was a genius, and he internalized the delusion. He thought he could outsmart a global financial syndicate. But his narcissism did not just put him in danger, it exposed the entire criminal architecture. I reviewed the timeline of the initial internal corporate audit that launched the federal task force. Marcus Sterling hired an independent risk management firm 6 months ago because his proprietary accounting software flagged irregular return codes on international vendor invoices. I looked at Julian's skim dates. The timeline aligned perfectly. The offshore handlers noticed their money was short. They attempted to reconcile the missing funds by generating supplementary fake invoices and routing them back through Sterling Logistics to cover the gap Julian created. That secondary wave of sloppy, rapid-fire invoicing is exactly what tripped the corporate alarms. Julian brought the federal government right to his own front door. He used stolen money belonging to his future father-in-law to buy luxury goods intended to impress that exact same future father-in-law. The poetic justice was almost cinematic. Marcus Sterling was hosting a $2 million wedding to welcome a man who systematically drained his corporate treasury. Harper Sterling was wearing diamonds purchased with cash siphoned from her own family empire. My brother built a spectacular house of cards on a foundation of gasoline, and he was currently standing on the roof holding a match. The trap was fully set. I had the wire logs, I had the IP addresses, I had the incorporation documents linking Julian to the stolen funds. The federal indictment would be swift and devastating. But a nagging instinct pulled at the edges of my focus. Julian was arrogant, but he was also relatively young and inexperienced in the banking sector. Opening a commercial tier proxy account capable of receiving multi-million-dollar international wire transfers requires significant collateral. Banks do not grant that level of unrestricted clearing power to a 20-something wealth manager without a substantial financial guarantee. The syndicate needed a domestic asset with real, tangible assets to anchor the shell company. Julian leased his car. He rented a high-end luxury apartment. He owned no property outright. He did not possess the necessary capital to act as the primary guarantor for Apex Holdings. Someone else had to back the loan. Someone else had to sign the foundational documents to give the shell company its initial legitimacy. I thought about my father, standing in my living room 48 hours ago, the frantic sweat on his brow, the desperate plea for untraceable cash. I thought about my mother, complaining about a glitch in her mortgage statement at the country club. The pieces shifted again, forming a darker, more sinister picture. Julian needed a clean asset to anchor his dirty business. The only clean asset the Ward family possessed was the sprawling suburban home my parents spent 30 years paying off. I minimized the wire transfer logs and opened the collateral subfolder provided by the task force. The folder contained the digitized banking agreements used to establish the Apex Holdings accounts. These were the foundational contracts, the documents that tied human beings to the corporate entity. If Julian forged the paperwork, he was facing standard fraud charges. If he did not forge the paperwork, the scope of the federal indictment was about to expand. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. The quiet hum of the refrigerator in the cabin kitchen seemed to amplify in the silence. I stared at the sealed PDF icon. I was hunting a thief. I knew I had caught my brother. Now I needed to know if I was about to catch my parents, too. Are they innocent bystanders caught in the blast radius of their golden child's greed? Or are they active accomplices in a multi-million-dollar fraud? I double-clicked the icon to open the file. The sun began to crest over the tree line, casting a pale gray light across the surface of the lake. I had not slept. I sat in the exact same position at the heavy oak dining table for 6 hours. The air in the cabin was cool and still. My eyes burned from the glare of the dual monitors, but my mind was running at terminal velocity. I clicked the PDF icon to open the collateral subfolder. The document loaded slowly. It was a scanned copy of a commercial bridge loan agreement. These types of contracts are standard in high-level corporate finance. They provide immediate short-term liquidity while long-term funding is secured. But in the shadow banking sector, these agreements are weapons. They are designed to trap the borrower. I heard the floorboards creak behind me. Liam walked out of the bedroom. He wore a faded gray t-shirt and flannel pajama pants. He did not say a word. He walked straight into the kitchen and started the coffee maker. The smell of roasted grounds filled the small space, pulling me back to physical reality for a brief second. Liam poured 2 mugs. He walked over and set one down next to my keyboard. The ceramic was warm against my knuckles. He stood behind my chair, resting his hand on my right shoulder. He is a high school history teacher. He spends his days analyzing primary source documents and teaching teenagers how to spot historical bias. He knows how to read the fine print. He leaned forward, looking over my shoulder at the screen. "What is that?" he asked. His voice was rough with sleep. I told him it was the foundational loan document for Apex Holdings. I explained that Julian needed a tangible asset to anchor the dummy corporation and give it the appearance of legitimacy for the incoming offshore wires. The syndicate required collateral. Liam followed the lines of dense legalese down the page. His eyes scanned the listed assets. He stopped breathing for a fraction of a second. His grip tightened on my shoulder. "Stella," he said quietly, "look at the signatures." I scrolled to the final page of the contract. The digital rendering was crisp. There were 3 signature lines at the bottom of the page. The first line belonged to the primary corporate officer, Julian Ward. He signed his name with a jagged, rushed stroke. The next 2 lines were designated for the individual financial guarantors. I stared at the ink. I recognized the handwriting instantly. The second line bore the precise blocky print of my father, Richard Ward. He always pressed too hard with his pen, leaving deep grooves in the paper. The third line featured sweeping, looping cursive, Diane Ward. She always added an unnecessary flourish to the tail of the letter D. They signed it. My parents signed the collateral agreement. They legally tied themselves to the Apex Holdings shell company. I scrolled back up to the schedule of assets attached to the guarantor signatures. I needed to see what they pledged. A commercial bridge loan of this magnitude requires significant equity. The text listed a single parcel of real estate. It spelled out the exact lot number, the county zoning code, and the physical street address. It was the house on Maple Drive, the sprawling suburban estate my parents purchased 30 years ago. The house where I grew up doing Julian's homework at the kitchen table. They owned it free and clear. There was no mortgage. Until they handed the deed over to a shadow lender to finance their golden child's fake consulting firm. The puzzle pieces snapped together with terrifying precision. I thought back to the country club engagement dinner. Diane standing in the mahogany hallway holding her sparkling water. She complained to Harper's wealthy aunt about a bank error. She claimed they received an intimidating letter regarding a missed payment on their mortgage. She called it a glitch. It was not a glitch. A shadow bank does not send polite reminders. They send legal notices of default. The syndicate placed a lien on the house. Because Julian was greedily skimming money off the top of the laundered funds, he failed to maintain the required balance to service the bridge loan interest. The lenders were calling the debt. They were preparing to foreclose on my parents' home. Diane and Richard were on the verge of losing everything they owned to an international crime ring. My heart hammered against my ribs. I toggled back to the Apex Holdings master ledger. I needed to see the exact numbers. I filtered the outgoing wire transfers for the past 30 days looking for failed transactions. The search returned a single hit from 14 days ago. An automated transfer originating from Julian's firm directed to a numbered account in the Isle of Man. The transaction was flagged as insufficient funds and bounced back. I looked at the transaction amount, $15,000, 0 cents. The air left my lungs. 48 hours ago, Richard stood on the rug in my living room, sweating and frantic. He demanded $15,000 in untraceable cash. He lied to my face. He claimed Julian experienced a sudden vendor overage for the wedding catering. He tried to weaponize my guilt, telling me I owed my brother a pristine public image. Richard was not trying to pay a florist. He was trying to cover a bounced interest payment to a shadow lender. He was trying to stop the syndicate from seizing the roof over his head. And he tried to use my hard-earned savings to do it. He tried to drain my bank account to subsidize a multi-million-dollar federal crime. I sat back in the chair. The coffee in my mug stopped producing steam. Liam stood behind me, silent and steady. He processed the information at the exact same pace I did. He saw the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. They did not just favor Julian. They actively conspired with him to gamble their entire livelihood. And when they lost, they tried to extort me to cover their debts. The dramatic irony was almost suffocating. My family treated me like an unwanted pest. Diane explicitly canceled my hotel room just yesterday to assert her dominance and exile me from the Sterling family festivities. Julian threatened to ruin my professional career over a stolen vintage ring. They strutted around the luxury resort draped in diamonds purchased with dirty money, viewing themselves as untouchable titans of society. They had no idea that the daughter they banished to a cabin in the woods was currently holding the unredacted blueprints to their destruction. I held the nuclear codes. I possessed the digital paper trail that would send the FBI through the front door of the house on Maple Drive. One phone call to the task force director, and the wedding would turn into a federal raid. Julian would face decades in a penitentiary. Richard and Diane would be indicted as co-conspirators. The government would seize the house, freeze their retirement accounts, and leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I held their entire existence in the palm of my hand. I looked at Liam. His face was a mask of quiet support. He did not tell me what to do. He never tells me what to do. He respects my agency. "You have the whole picture now," Liam said softly. The words hung in the quiet cabin. I did have the whole picture. I saw the rot at the foundation of the Ward family. It was not just petty favoritism or mild narcissism. It was active, willing criminality. I turned my attention back to the monitors. Tomorrow night was the rehearsal dinner, the event Diane tried to sabotage with her denim dress code trap. She wanted me to show up looking like a peasant so she could feel superior. Julian wanted to use me as a punchline during his toasts to entertain his billionaire future father-in-law. They planned to spend the evening mocking me while standing inches away from the financial guillotine they built for themselves. A deep, cold resolve settled over my chest. I spent my entire life absorbing their insults. I absorbed the slights, the forgotten birthdays, the stolen inheritances, and the casual cruelty. I told myself it was just family dynamics. I told myself it was easier to endure it and to fight it. But this crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They tried to drag my financial security into their criminal enterprise. I saved the collateral agreement to an encrypted flash drive. I exported the bounced wire logs. I compiled the evidence into a single, clean digital dossier. The task force would have everything they needed. But a federal indictment takes time. It requires grand juries and sealed warrants. It is a slow, bureaucratic process. I did not want a slow process. I wanted immediate, undeniable consequences. I looked at the glowing screen. I had the power to destroy them. But sending the file to the authorities felt too distant. I needed them to see it coming. I needed them to know exactly who tore down their house of cards. The rehearsal dinner was 24 hours away. Do I burn my own parents to the ground to serve justice? The digital dossier sat on my encrypted flash drive, a small rectangle of plastic containing 20 years of federal prison time for my brother and total financial ruin for my parents. I stared at the drive resting on the wooden table. The logical, professional path was clear. I upload the file to the secure task force server, alert my director, and step away from the blast radius. Let the Department of Justice handle the Ward family. But the professional path ignores the 32 years of blood and bone tying me to the names on those forged documents. I am an auditor, but I am also a daughter who still harbored a microscopic, irrational hope that her father might choose her over a lie. I picked up my cell phone. The screen showed 11 in the morning. The rehearsal dinner was 8 hours away. I found Richard's name in my contacts. I hovered my thumb over the call button. I decided to offer him one final exit ramp, a vague warning, a chance to stop the wedding. Hire a criminal defense attorney and mitigate the damage before Marcus Sterling discovered his future son-in-law was a money mule. I pressed call. The phone rang twice. Richard answered. His voice was clipped and breathless. The background noise of the luxury resort lobby echoed through the speaker. "Stella," he said, "I am busy with the florist. We are currently fixing the disaster you caused by refusing to help your brother the other night." The audacity of his greeting barely registered over the cold numbness spreading through my chest. He was still clinging to the caterer overage lie. He still viewed me as the villain for refusing to empty my savings account to cover his shadow banking debt. I cut him off. "Dad, listen to me. I need you to walk away from the crowd. Go somewhere private." My tone was devoid of emotion, the flat, authoritative register I use during suspect interviews. Richard hesitated. I heard the rustle of fabric as he moved. A heavy door clicked shut, shutting out the ambient lobby noise. "I am in the coat room," he snapped. "What do you want? You are already making things difficult for your mother by forcing us to explain your absence at the resort." I ignored the jab. "Dad, Julian's wealth management firm is not what you think it is. It is tied to very bad people, dangerous people. He is operating completely outside the bounds of legitimate finance." I paused, letting the words land. "You need to halt this wedding immediately. You need to pull him out of that resort and hire a federal criminal defense attorney right now. Today." Silence stretched across the cellular connection. It was thick and heavy. I waited for the realization to dawn on him. I waited for the panic of a father discovering his son is in deep trouble. Instead, I heard a sharp click. The line beeped, indicating a merged call. Richard had conferenced in my mother. Diane's voice erupted through the speaker with the force of a detonating landmine. "You are sick," she screamed. The volume forced me to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. "You are deeply, pathologically sick, Stella. Richard just told me what you said. How dare you? How dare you attempt to ruin your brother's big day with these deranged, paranoid fantasies?" I tried to interject. "Mom, I have seen the paperwork. I know about the house. I know about the lien. I know about the $15,000. She did not let me finish. She steamrolled right over the facts with sheer volume. "You do not know anything. You sit in a drab little cubicle crunching numbers for a mediocre salary, while Julian operates in the upper echelons of society. He is marrying into a billionaire empire. He is securing the future of this family. And you just cannot stand it. You are rotting with jealousy because he found success, and you are stuck with a high school history teacher who drives a used sedan." Her words were designed to inflict maximum psychological damage. She attacked Liam. She attacked my career. She attacked my sanity. It was the same tactic she deployed at the bridal luncheon, just escalated to a private, hysterical pitch. She needed to destroy the messenger to avoid dealing with the message. I pictured her standing in a corner of the pristine resort, screaming into her phone while clutching her designer purse. She was a woman choosing to go down with the sinking ship, simply because the ship looked expensive. "Stella, listen to me very carefully," Diane hissed. Her voice dropped an octave, losing the hysteria and adopting a cold, lethal edge. "This is my final warning to you. If you show up at that botanical garden tonight and speak one single negative word, if you cause a scene, if you attempt to float these insane conspiracy theories to the Sterlings or to anyone else, we are done." I did not respond. I let her lay out the terms of my execution. "I will formally disown you," she continued. "I will have the lawyers remove you from the family trust on Monday morning. You will receive nothing when we pass. Furthermore, I will contact your grandparents' assisted living facility. I hold their medical power of attorney. I will explicitly bar you from the premises. You will never see them again. You will be entirely cut off. An orphan. Do you understand me?" The ultimatum hung in the quiet air of the cabin. It was a staggering threat. She was leveraging my grandparents, the only decent relatives I possessed, to buy my silence. She was threatening to erase my existence from the family registry to protect Julian's stolen diamond necklace and his fake wealth management firm. She did not ask me why I thought Julian was in trouble. She did not ask me to explain the paperwork I mentioned. She did not care if I was telling the truth. She only cared about the image. I sat at the heavy oak table. The encrypted flash drive sat inches from my fingers. I looked at the dark plastic casing. I thought about the 32 years I spent trying to earn a seat at a table that was built to exclude me. I thought about doing Julian's homework, driving the old rusty car, and watching them praise his every mediocre achievement. I thought about the country club dinner and the denim dress code trap. I realized with crystalline clarity that my mother did not love me. She viewed me as a liability, a risk to be managed, a defect to be hidden. The microscopic, irrational hope that my father might intervene withered and died. Richard remained silent on the conference line. He let his wife threaten to banish his daughter forever, and he did not say a single word in my defense. He chose his enabler role. He chose the lie. The emotional tie severing did not sound like a snap. It felt like a heavy chain finally dropping to the floor. The weight vanished. A profound, icy calmness washed through my veins. The grief evaporated, leaving only the sharp, precise focus of a predator. I was no longer a daughter trying to save her family from a burning building. I was an auditor on the clock, and my targets just handed me a signed confession of their unrepentant cruelty. "Okay, Mom," I said quietly. My voice was steady. It held no anger and no fear. Diane scoffed. "Good," she snapped. "See that you remember your place tonight." She ended the call. The dial tone echoed in the silent room. Liam walked out of the kitchen holding a plate of sliced fruit. He set it on the table and looked at my face. He saw the shift. The softness was gone. The hesitation was gone. "Did you give them the warning?" he asked. "I did," I replied. I picked up the encrypted flash drive and slipped it into the pocket of my sweatpants. I looked at the clock. It was noon. I had 7 hours to prepare. I stood up and walked toward the bedroom closet where the heavy silk crepe of the emerald evening gown waited in the dark. I pulled the protective plastic cover off the dress. The rich green fabric caught the ambient light. It looked like armor. "They made their choice," Liam said, leaning against the doorframe. "They did," I agreed. "They chose the golden child. Now they get to keep him." The ultimatum was delivered. The lines were drawn. Diane expected me to arrive at the Botanical Garden Pavilion broken and submissive. She expected me to cower in the corner wearing denim while she paraded her billionaire-adjacent son around the imported orchids. She thought the threat of disownment was her ultimate weapon. She had no idea. She just gave me permission to pull the trigger. The family drama was over. The execution was scheduled. I turned to the mirror and began to get ready. How does an auditor dismantle a criminal enterprise during a black tie optional rehearsal dinner? You do not yell. You do not argue. You simply show up, look perfect, and wait for the target to step into the exact trap they built for you. The Botanical Garden Pavilion sat under a canopy of imported glass. Wrought iron arches curled toward the sky wrapped in white climbing roses. Warm amber lights glowed against the dusk. A valet took the keys to our car. I stepped onto the flagstone path. The air held the crisp scent of crushed leaves and expensive catering. Liam walked beside me wearing a tailored black suit that cost a fraction of the one surrounding us, but fit him perfectly. He looked like a man who knew exactly who he was. I walked beside him, wearing the emerald silk crepe gown. The fabric draped over my shoulders like liquid glass. The high boat neckline felt like armor. My heels clicked a steady rhythm against the stone. I did not look like a woman attending a casual backyard barbecue. I looked like a woman arriving to collect a debt. We handed our coats to the attendant and entered the main hall. Crystal chandeliers illuminated tables covered in heavy white linen. Waiters in pressed tuxedo shirts carried silver trays of champagne flutes. A string quartet played in the corner. I scanned the room. It took 10 seconds to locate my mother. Diane stood near the head table holding court with a group of Harper's relatives. She wore a sapphire blue evening dress. She turned her head mid-laugh and locked eyes with me. The laugh died in her throat. Her jaw physically dropped. I watched the realization wash over her face in real time. Her denim dress code trap was utterly obliterated. She expected me to walk through those doors wearing faded jeans and a cotton blouse. She expected the Sterlings to stare at me with polite horror while she played the embarrassed matriarch. Instead, I stood under the chandelier looking like I belonged at the head of the boardroom. The emerald silk caught the light, projecting quiet, undeniable authority. Diane's face turned a mottled shade of red. She excused herself from the wealthy aunts and marched across the room. She intercepted us before we could reach the bar. She kept her smile fixed in place for the benefit of the surrounding guests, but her eyes were lethal. "What are you wearing?" she hissed through clenched teeth. Her voice barely carried over the string quartet. I kept my posture relaxed. I looked down at the silk gown and back up at her. "I am wearing evening attire, Mom," I said, just like the wedding website specified. Black tie optional. I figured the barbecue theme was a typo. Diane narrowed her eyes. She knew I bypassed her security barrier. She knew her petty sabotage failed. She leaned in close enough that I could smell her expensive floral perfume. "You think you are clever," she whispered. "You think a nice dress changes anything. Remember our phone calls, Stella. You are walking on a razor-thin wire tonight. One word, and you are erased." I smiled, politely, a genuine, warm expression that clearly unnerved her. I remember the call perfectly. I replied, "I will not say a single negative word about Julian tonight. I promise." She searched my face for a trap. Finding none, she offered a curt nod and spun on her heel, returning to her audience. She thought she won. She believed the threat of disownment forced my compliance. She did not realize my promise was literal. I did not need to speak a single word to ruin Julian. The digital dossier in my pocket would do all the talking. The maitre d' rang a soft chime signaling the start of dinner. Guests filtered toward their assigned seats. Liam and I were banished to a corner table near the emergency exit. We sat with a group of third cousins and a few mid-level corporate executives from Sterling Logistics. I remained silent, analyzing the dynamics at the head table. Julian sat next to Harper. He drank heavily. He gestured with wide, erratic sweeps of his arms, knocking over a water goblet at one point. The golden child was cracking under the pressure of his shadow banking debt. The $15,000 bounced wire loomed over him, and he was self-medicating with top-shelf bourbon. I shifted my focus to Harper. Throughout the engagement, she projected an aura of cold complicity. She wore the stolen vintage ring. She rolled her eyes at waitstaff. I assumed she was a willing participant in the Ward family illusion. But watching her tonight, the red herring shattered. Harper sat rigid in her chair. She watched Julian down his third glass of bourbon with a look of profound unease. When he knocked over the goblet, she flinched. She did not look like a mastermind or an accomplice. She looked like a sheltered young woman realizing the man she was marrying possessed a dark, unpredictable edge. She was a pawn. Her father's wealth made her a target, and Julian used her to access the Sterling corporate treasury. She had no idea the diamond resting against her collarbone belonged to my dead grandmother. The plates were cleared. Coffee and dessert arrived. A member of the wedding party tapped a spoon against a glass. The room settled into an expectant hush. Julian stood up. He swayed slightly, gripping the edge of the table to steady himself. A waiter handed him a wireless microphone. Julian flashed his trademark grin, but it looked strained. He launched into a rambling speech. He praised Harper's beauty. He thanked Marcus Sterling for his immense generosity. Then the bourbon took the wheel. His insecurities bubbled to the surface, demanding a target. He needed to assert his dominance to soothe the panic of his impending financial ruin. He looked across the room, bypassing 100 faces, until he found me sitting in the back corner. The smirk widened. "And of course, we have my sister Stella," Julian announced into the microphone. The speakers amplified his slurred words, echoing off the glass ceiling. "Let us raise a glass to Stella. She could not find a wealthy husband of her own, so she settles for counting other people's pennies in a back office. Maybe if she takes some notes tonight, she can learn how the other half lives." The Ward family erupted in laughter. My father chuckled, looking down at his dessert plate. Diane offered a performative sigh, shaking her head at my supposed inferiority. Several of Julian's fraternity brothers hooted from a nearby table. Harper did not laugh. She looked deeply uncomfortable. She stared at Julian with wide, anxious eyes, recognizing the sheer cruelty of the unprovoked attack. The Sterling executives seated at my table exchanged confused glances. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact with my brother. My face remained a blank, unreadable mask. Under the tablecloth, Liam slid his hand around my waist. His touch was a solid, unyielding anchor in a room full of noise. He grounded me. He reminded me that the people laughing at me were ghosts. They were hollow shells built on stolen money and forged signatures. Julian basked in the laughter. He thought he delivered the ultimate humiliating blow. He thought he proved his superiority. I watched him with the cold, detached gaze of a predator, waiting for the prey to step onto the pressure plate. He handed the microphone back to the waiter. He sat down and kissed Harper's cheek. My right hand rested in my lap. I held my encrypted cellular device. The screen was awake. The email client was open. I had pre-drafted the message 4 hours ago. The recipient was the private direct email address of Marcus Sterling. A heavily guarded inbox provided to the Federal Task Force for Emergency Communications regarding parent entity A. The subject line read, "Urgent Federal Audit Disclosures regarding Apex Holdings." The body of the email contained no pleasantries. It simply verified my credentials as the lead investigator and directed him to review the attached digital dossier. The dossier contained the forged collateral agreement, the wire transfer logs, and the undeniable proof that Julian Ward was laundering money for the syndicate. Julian raised his bourbon glass across the room, offering me a mock salute. I maintained eye contact with him. My thumb hovered over the digital interface. I did not say a negative word. I kept my promise to Diane. I pressed send. The progress bar flashed across the bottom of my screen. The data payload flew through the encrypted servers, leaving my device and traveling directly into the pocket of the billionaire sitting at the head table. The trap snapped shut. The execution was delivered. I slipped the phone back into my small clutch purse and took a sip of my coffee. What happens when the billionaire reads his emails? The morning of the wedding dawned with a flat, gray sky. A low-pressure system settled over the resort, threatening rain. The oppressive humidity matched the heavy electric tension humming beneath my skin. Liam and I checked out of the quiet cabin near the lake. We drove back to the resort in silence. The time for planning was over. The data payload was delivered. Now, I simply had to wait for the blast wave to hit. I wore a tailored slate gray dress. It was unadorned and strictly professional. I looked less like a wedding guest and more like a woman arriving for a deposition. The pre-ceremony cocktail hour was hosted in the grand atrium. It was a massive architectural marvel of vaulted glass ceilings and polished limestone floors. 200 high society guests milled around the space. String instruments played a soft, classical arrangement, attempting to cut through the din of overlapping conversations. Waiters in pristine white jackets floated through the crowd, offering silver trays of hors d'oeuvres. It was the pinnacle of the Sterling family's social calendar. It was a display of unimpeachable wealth and status. I stood near a towering marble pillar near the edge of the room. Liam stood beside me holding 2 glasses of sparkling water. We watched the Ward family operate. Diane darted between groups of affluent strangers, introducing herself with breathless enthusiasm. Richard trailed behind her, holding a cocktail napkin and nodding at appropriate intervals. Julian was holding court near the center of the atrium. He looked significantly worse than he did the night before. The hangover was visible in the tight lines around his eyes and the slight tremor in his hands. But the impending vows seemed to inject him with a manic, desperate energy. He was hours away from securing his position in the Sterling Empire. He thought the finish line was in sight. I scanned the room for Marcus Sterling. The billionaire patriarch was not difficult to locate. He commanded a wide perimeter of personal space near the arched entrance to the main ballroom. He wore a bespoke tuxedo that projected quiet, lethal authority. He was flanked by 2 men wearing dark suits who were clearly private security. Marcus was staring at a secured tablet held in his left hand. He swiped the screen with slow, deliberate motions. He was not mingling. He was not greeting guests. He was entirely consumed by the information glowing on the digital display. The email I sent the night before contained a dense, highly technical forensic audit report. It required time to process. It required verification from his internal risk management team. I watched him read the final summary conclusions. I knew exactly what page he was looking at. The page detailing the domestic shell company Apex Holdings. the page linking the stolen $50 million directly to the man preparing to marry his daughter. Julian noticed Marcus standing alone. He saw an opportunity to secure favor before the ceremony began. Julian downed the remainder of his drink and handed the empty glass to a passing waiter. He spotted me standing near the marble pillar. The manic energy flared in his eyes. He wanted an audience for his final act of dominance. He wanted to demonstrate his superiority to his billionaire future father-in-law by dragging his inferior sister into the light. Julian marched across the limestone floor. He grabbed my forearm. His grip was tight, bruising. He did not ask me to accompany him. He pulled me through the crowded atrium, navigating the sea of silk dresses and tailored suits. Liam stepped forward, but I caught his eye and offered a microscopic shake of my head. Let him do it. Let Julian build his own gallows. We stopped 3 feet in front of Marcus Sterling. The 2 security contractors shifted their weight, tracking our movement. Julian puffed out his chest, attempting to project confidence. He flashed his trademark rehearsed smile. "Mr. Sterling," Julian announced. His voice was unnecessarily loud, drawing the attention of several nearby guests. "I wanted to introduce you properly. This is my sister, Stella." Julian paused, letting the silence stretch for maximum comedic effect. He leaned in conspiratorially. "She is our family failure. Does taxes in a cubicle somewhere. Just pushing paper." Diane materialized at my right shoulder. She materialized out of thin air drawn by the gravitational pull of Marcus Sterling's wealth. She heard Julian's introduction. She heard the punchline. She did not correct him. She did not defend her daughter. She offered a high-pitched, nervous laugh and patted Julian's arm. "Oh, Julian, stop it," she chided gently. She turned to Marcus with a wide, artificial smile. "She is the quiet one, Mr. Sterling. We do not brag about her. She prefers to stay out of the spotlight." I stood between my mother and my brother. I stared at the polished limestone floor. I did not fight back. I did not defend my career or my intellect. I played the role they assigned me to absolute perfection. I let them hand me over like a defective piece of merchandise. I let them dig the hole as deep as they possibly could. Marcus Sterling did not laugh. He did not offer a polite chuckle or a sympathetic nod. He stopped swiping the screen. He lowered the secured tablet, holding it flush against his side. He looked at Julian. The expression on the billionaire's face was not anger. It was something far more terrifying. It was absolute, clinical zero. He looked at my brother the way an exterminator looks at a termite. Then Marcus turned his gaze to me. He stared at my face. He processed the facial recognition software running in his own brain. For the past 6 weeks, the Joint Federal Task Force conducted high-level briefings with the Sterling Corporate Board via heavily encrypted video conferencing software. I led those briefings. My face was transmitted onto massive screens in secure boardrooms, while I detailed the mechanics of the international embezzlement ring draining his treasury. I was the architect of his financial salvation. And here I was, standing in his atrium, being mocked by a low-level money mule. Marcus Sterling stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the atrium seemed to mute. The clinking glasses, the string quartet, the low hum of 200 conversations simply vanished into a vacuum. The security contractors noticed the shift in their employer's demeanor and stepped half a pace closer. Marcus ignored Julian completely. He dismissed him from his physical reality. He stepped toward me, closing the distance. He looked down into my eyes. His voice dropped to a low, echoing rumble that carried a seismic weight. "So it is you," Marcus said quietly. "This is unexpected." The words hung in the sterile air of the atrium. They were not words of confusion. They were words of profound, sudden clarity. The billionaire patriarch recognized the lead federal forensic investigator standing in his lobby wearing a slate gray dress. Julian blinked. The rehearsed smile slipped off his face. He looked from Marcus to me and back again. The gears in his head ground together, trying to process the interaction. He expected Marcus to dismiss me with a polite nod. He expected to bond with his future father-in-law over my mediocrity. He did not expect the billionaire to address me with a tone bordering on quiet reverence. "Sir," Julian stammered. The arrogant edge evaporated from his voice, replaced by a thin, reedy panic. "Do you know Stella? I mean, she just works at a mid-level accounting firm. It is nothing impressive." Diane sensed the catastrophic shift in the atmosphere. Her social survival instincts fired. She stepped forward, attempting to insert herself between Marcus and the perceived threat. "Oh, Mr. Sterling, I am sure you have never met her," Diane interjected rapidly. "She works in a back office. She does not handle anything important." Marcus slowly turned his head. He looked at Diane Ward. The temperature in the atrium plummeted. The absolute clinical zero returned to his eyes. He looked at my mother, and he prepared to dismantle her entire false reality. How will the Ward family react when their designated failure is recognized by a king? Julian let out a short, hollow laugh. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, trying to reestablish the rhythm of a conversation that had just derailed. He looked at Marcus Sterling with wide, searching eyes, expecting the billionaire to join in the joke. "Sir, I think you have her confused with someone else," Julian said. His voice cracked on the final syllable. He pointed a trembling finger in my direction. "This is Stella. She works at a regional tax firm. She does not run in your circles." Diane sensed the rigid, unyielding posture of the man standing before us. She recognized that Julian was floundering. Her instinct was to seize control of the narrative and smooth over the uncomfortable social wrinkle. She stepped closer to Marcus, invading his personal space with a practiced, eager charm. She offered a dismissive wave of her hand, gesturing toward me, as if brushing away a persistent fly. "Oh, you must know our little bookkeeper from some tedious compliance seminar, Mr. Sterling," she chirped. The words dripped with condescension. "She is very diligent with her spreadsheets. We are glad she has a steady job, but let us not bore you with her mundane office details. Today is about Julian." Marcus Sterling did not blink. He slowly turned his head, fixing his gaze on my mother. The temperature in our immediate radius seemed to plunge. He looked at Diane the way a judge looks at a convicted perjurer. He did not raise his voice. He did not need volume to command the room. He repeated her phrase, letting it hang in the pristine air. "Little bookkeeper." He looked back at his secured tablet and then lifted his eyes to address the trio standing in front of him. "Your daughter is not a bookkeeper," Marcus said. The timbre of his voice carried a sharp, unvarnished authority. "She is the lead forensic investigator for the Joint Federal Task Force. She is the architect of the financial audit that just saved my corporate empire." The words echoed across the limestone floor. They struck my family with the kinetic force of a physical blow. Richard stood a few feet away holding his cocktail napkin. His mouth fell open. The jaw literally slackened. He stared at me as if I had just peeled off a human mask to reveal an alien species underneath. The daughter he ordered to hand over her life savings to cover a shadow banking debt was a federal investigator. The cognitive dissonance paralyzed him. He could not process the vast canyon between the lie he lived and the truth standing right in front of him. But Julian processed it. I watched the exact moment my brother realized he was a dead man walking. The smug arrogance melted off his features, leaving behind a raw, naked terror. His skin turned a sickly, translucent shade of gray. The flush of the morning bourbon vanished. He swayed, swaying backward a fraction of an inch, as if the floor tilted beneath his expensive leather shoes. Marcus was not finished. He delivered the final numerical nail into the coffin. For the past 6 weeks, Stella has been tracking a $50 million international syndicate, the billionaire continued. She dismantled their offshore routing protocols. She unmasked their dummy corporations. She sat in secure executive briefings and guided my board of directors through the most sophisticated financial crisis we have ever faced. $50 million. Julian heard the figure and his knees visibly buckled. He grabbed the edge of a nearby cocktail table to keep himself upright. He knew the scale of the money he was handling, but hearing the victim recite the total sum out loud shattered his remaining delusions. Julian realized that the sister he exiled to a cabin in the woods was the federal agent hunting him. He realized that when I looked at him in the hallway and smiled after he threatened my career, I was not retreating. I was finalizing his indictment. The surrounding guests noticed the disturbance. The wealthy socialites and corporate executives occupying the grand atrium stopped their polite chatter. They turned their heads, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure. Harper Sterling stood near the floral archway holding a glass of champagne. She watched her groom, leaning against a table, gasping for air. Her eyes darted from Julian to her father and finally to me. The puzzle pieces were falling into place for the bride. Diane Ward could not accept the scene unfolding around her. Her entire identity was tethered to the belief that Julian was a genius and I was a failure. Confronted with undeniable proof from a billionaire patriarch, her mind fractured. She could not comprehend a reality where I possessed more power and prestige than her golden child. So her ego demanded an immediate rewrite. If I was a success, then she needed to be the reason for it. Diane plastered a manic, fractured smile across her face. She reached out, attempting to touch my arm in a show of maternal pride. I stepped backward, avoiding her hand. She ignored the rejection and turned her beaming face back to Marcus. "Well, of course she is." Diane stammered, her voice pitching higher with desperate, frantic energy. "We always pushed her to work hard. The Ward family work ethic is rigorous. We instilled that discipline in her from a very young age. We knew she had a knack for numbers. We are so incredibly proud of the foundation we provided for her." She was trying to steal the credit. She spent 32 years treating me like a defective burden. She spent the last 3 days attempting to humiliate me, isolating me from the family block, and threatening to disown me if I spoke a single word. Now she wanted to bask in the glow of my federal title. She wanted to align herself with the prestige she spent decades trying to suppress. Marcus Sterling cut her off. The motion was swift and decisive. He raised his left hand, halting her frantic monologue. The smile died on her face. "She achieved this without your support," Marcus said. The words sliced through the air like a freshly sharpened blade. His tone left no room for debate or negotiation. "I have read the preliminary background briefings regarding this task force. I am well aware of the isolated nature of her work. Do not attempt to claim ownership of an intellect you clearly do not appreciate." Diane flinched as if he had struck her across the cheek. The public rebuke from a man of his stature was the ultimate social humiliation. She opened her mouth to argue, to defend her maternal image, but the sheer, imposing presence of the billionaire forced her into silence. She shrank back, bumping into Richard, who remained frozen like a statue. Marcus turned his attention away from my parents and focused entirely on Julian. The young wealth manager was hyperventilating. Sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining his tailored appearance. Marcus held up the secured tablet, tapping the screen with one precise finger. "I just finished reading the final, unredacted report your sister submitted this morning," Marcus stated. His voice was a low, dangerous murmur intended only for the people standing in our immediate circle. "It is a fascinating document. Her report highlights the exact domestic node the syndicate utilized. It outlines the mechanics of the bridge loans, and most importantly, it identifies the exact individual who facilitated the local laundering." The psychological door slammed shut in their faces. The trap locked. Julian let out a quiet, ragged whimper. He looked at me, his eyes pleading for a mercy he never once offered me. He knew his name was on that screen. He knew the address of his firm was sitting in the billionaire's hands. He knew the forged collateral agreement bearing our parents' signatures was fully exposed. The abusers scrambled to assert their dominance. They tried to minimize me. They tried to claim me. Now they were simply staring at the architect of their total destruction. I stood tall in the slate gray dress. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I let the silence do the work. The execution was ready to move from the private circle into the broad daylight of the atrium. How brutal will the public fallout be? Marcus Sterling rotated his wrist, turning the secured tablet so the screen faced outward. The bright display illuminated the space between us. The text was sharp and undeniable. It was the cover page of the domestic node dossier. He did not yell. He did not need to. The quiet lethality of his tone carried further than any shout. He locked his eyes on the trembling groom. Apex Holdings, Marcus stated, reading the name like an indictment. Registered to your office address in Overland Park. Backed by a commercial bridge loan secured against your parents' personal real estate. You funneled millions of dollars through a phantom consulting firm while shaving a percentage off the top to fund your own lifestyle. You thought you could sit at my dinner table, drink my wine, and steal my corporate treasury to buy my daughter. The words echoed off the vaulted glass ceiling of the atrium. The silence that followed was absolute. 200 high society guests, corporate executives, and extended relatives stopped breathing simultaneously. The string quartet had long since abandoned their instruments. The catering staff froze in place, holding trays of untouched champagne. Every single face in the room turned toward the small cluster standing near the marble pillar. The illusion of the Ward family wealth evaporated, leaving behind a stark, ugly reality of theft and desperation. Harper Sterling pushed her way through the crowd of bridesmaids. She stood 3 feet from Julian. Her face was pale. The pristine white silk of her wedding gown looked heavy and oppressive. She looked at the tablet in her father's hand and then at the man she was preparing to marry. She heard the accusation. She heard the mechanics of the fraud. And then her eyes drifted toward me. She remembered the tension at the welcome brunch. She remembered my intense focus on the diamond resting against her collarbone. The final piece of the puzzle slotted into place in her mind. It was not a custom design. Harper whispered. Her voice trembled, cutting through the dead air of the atrium. You stole it. The ring you bragged about giving me, you stole it from your own sister. Julian opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. He raised a shaking hand in a pathetic attempt to placate her. Harper did not wait for a response. She reached behind her neck, fumbling with the heavy platinum clasp. She yanked the necklace forward, snapping the delicate chain. The sound of breaking metal was loud and distinct. She threw the jewelry directly at Julian's chest. The heavy diamond struck his lapel and clattered onto the limestone floor, bouncing toward my shoes. I looked down at my grandmother's old mine-cut stone resting on the cold stone. It looked exactly where it belonged, removed from the throat of a pawn and stripped from the hands of a thief. Richard Ward collapsed. He did not faint, but his legs simply gave out. He grabbed the back of a nearby cocktail chair to break his fall, sinking heavily onto the padded seat. He gasped for air, pulling at the collar of his stiff dress shirt. The reality of his situation crashed over him. He was a retired logistics manager who spent his entire life avoiding conflict. He signed a piece of paper to support his golden child because it was easier than asking difficult questions. Now that single signature was preparing to erase 30 years of mortgage payments and leave him homeless. He stared at his trembling hands, unable to look at his wife, his son, or the billionaire standing in front of him. Diane shattered. The pristine facade of the philanthropic visionary disintegrated into raw, feral panic. The country club luncheons, the manicured lawns, the carefully curated social superiority, all of it was burning to ash in front of 200 wealthy witnesses. She could not attack Marcus Sterling. She could not attack Harper. She reverted to her default programming. She needed a scapegoat. She needed the family failure to absorb the blame for the catastrophe. Diane lunged forward, her face contorted with rage. "You did this," she screamed, pointing a manicured finger at my chest. Her voice tore through the quiet room, raw and hysterical. "You ruined us. You set him up. You could not stand to see him succeed. So you fabricated this entire insane investigation just to destroy him on his wedding day. You are a monster, Stella." Liam shifted his weight, stepping slightly in front of me. He prepared to physically block her if she moved closer. I placed a hand on his arm, gently pulling him back. I did not need an anchor to shield me from my mother. I was immune to her poison. I stepped forward, closing the distance until I stood inches away from her trembling, outstretched finger. I looked into the eyes of the woman who forced me to the shadows for 32 years. I looked at the mother who explicitly uninvited my partner to dinner, who mocked my career, who canceled my hotel room to exile me, and who threatened to cut me off from my grandparents simply because I existed outside of her control. I felt no anger. I felt no pity. I felt the pure, clean satisfaction of an equation balancing perfectly. I delivered the ultimate poetic justice. My voice was calm, carrying the steady, rhythmic cadence of a professional reading the final verdict. I did not sign your mortgage, Mom, I said. I did not forge a collateral agreement pledging your home to a shadow bank. I did not steal Grandma's ring from her estate, Julian, and I did not route stolen international funds through a domestic shell company to lease sports cars. I swept my gaze over Julian shivering by the pillar, over Richard hyperventilating in the chair, and finally rested it back on Diane. You built a house of cards on a foundation of gasoline, I continued. You chose to live inside a delusion because it felt superior. I did not set you up. I did not ruin you. I just turned on the lights. Diane opened her mouth to scream again, but the sound died in her throat. She looked around the atrium. She saw the looks of disgust and pity radiating from the Sterling guests. She saw the absolute ruin of her social standing reflected in their eyes. She shrank back, wrapping her arms around her own torso. The realization hit her with devastating finality. She could not bully her way out of a federal indictment. Marcus Sterling tapped the earpiece resting inside his right ear. He offered a single, brief nod to his security detail. This is no longer a private family matter, Marcus announced, turning his back on Julian. It is an active corporate security crisis. The atrium doors swung open. Security contractors wearing dark suits and earpieces swarmed the room. They moved with military precision. They bypassed the terrified guests and formed a tight circle around Julian Ward. He was not detained by faceless police officers arriving in squad cars with flashing sirens. He was detained by the private corporate security force of the very man he spent 14 months trying to impress. The poetic justice was absolute. They gripped his arms, forcing his hands behind his back. Julian did not struggle. He hung his head, weeping quietly as they marched him across the polished limestone floor toward the service elevators. The groom was removed from his own wedding. The golden child was reduced to a weeping criminal perp-walked in front of high society. The Ward family illusion was completely dismantled. The federal task force would arrive within the hour to formally execute the warrants. The house on Maple Drive would be seized by the shadow bank before the ink on the indictment dried. The luxury cars would be repossessed. I stood in the center of the shattered atrium. I looked down at the floor and bent my knees. I reached out and picked up the vintage diamond ring. The heavy platinum setting felt cold against my skin. I slipped it into the pocket of my slate gray dress. I retrieved my stolen inheritance. The chaos swirled around me. The billionaire patriarch orchestrated the cleanup of his empire. The bride wept in the arms of her relatives. My parents sat broken and isolated in the wreckage of their own making. I had accomplished exactly what I set out to do. The audit was complete. What is left of the Ward family now? The service elevator doors slid shut, cutting off Julian's final panicked glance. The heavy metallic click echoed like a gavel striking a wooden block. The vacuum his departure created was instantly filled by a different frequency of noise. The atrium did not erupt into shouts. It dissolved into a frantic, hushed murmuring. 200 members of the regional elite scrambled to distance themselves from the blast radius. Men pulled their cell phones from their tailored pockets, typing rapid messages to their own wealth managers. Women whispered behind manicured hands, eyeing the Ward family like they carried a contagious pathogen. Marcus Sterling gestured toward the far entrance. A team of 4 men wearing sharp charcoal suits marched into the room. They carried leather briefcases and moved with the synchronized precision of apex predators. They were the Sterling corporate legal team. They bypassed the fleeing guests and formed a perimeter around the area where Julian had just been standing. They began confiscating the floral arrangements and gift tables, securing the premises for the impending arrival of federal agents. I turned my attention to my parents. The illusion they spent 3 decades cultivating lay shattered across the polished limestone. Diane dropped to her knees. The sapphire blue fabric of her expensive evening gown pooled around her on the cold, hard floor. She did not weep with the quiet dignity of a grieving mother. She sobbed with the harsh, ragged gasps of a cornered animal realizing the trap had sprung. Her hands clawed at the stone as if trying to find a hidden lever to reset the timeline. Her perfect makeup smeared, leaving dark streaks tracking down her flushed cheeks. She mourned the loss of her country club standing. She mourned the death of her unearned superiority. Richard remained in the low cocktail chair. He looked like a hollowed-out shell. His hands rested flat on his thighs. His knuckles were white. He stared straight ahead, seeing nothing but the inevitable arrival of the bank foreclosure notices. He signed his name on a shadow lending contract to protect a son who viewed him as nothing more than a convenient asset. The house on Maple Drive was gone. His retirement accounts would be frozen by the end of the business day. He chose the path of least resistance his entire life, and that path led him directly off a financial cliff. Neither of them looked at me. They could not meet the eyes of the daughter they discarded. They preferred to stare at the floor rather than acknowledge the architect of their ruin standing 2 feet away. Marcus Sterling dismissed his security detail with a subtle flick of his wrist. The perimeter expanded, granting us a small island of privacy amidst the swirling chaos. The billionaire patriarch turned his body toward me. The glacial, clinical zero vanished from his eyes. The tension in his jaw relaxed. He did not look at me as a threat or a nuisance. He looked at me as an equal. He straightened the cuffs of his bespoke tuxedo. "Miss Ward," he said. The low rumble of his voice carried a new cadence. It held professional reverence. "I have employed some of the sharpest risk management analysts in the world. They spent 6 months staring at internal ledgers and failed to locate the hemorrhage. You isolated the domestic node, unmasked the registered agent, and delivered the exact coordinates of the perpetrators in a matter of weeks." He paused, glancing briefly at Diane weeping on the stone floor. He looked back at my face. "You operated with a level of surgical precision that my own board of directors lacks," Marcus continued. "You prioritized the integrity of the audit over the preservation of your own bloodline. That kind of incorruptibility is rare. It is also highly profitable." I stood silent, listening to the pitch. "I am terminating my current head of corporate intelligence effective immediately," Marcus stated. "The position requires a mind capable of seeing the structural flaws everyone else ignores. I want you in that chair. I am offering you an executive partnership at Sterling Logistics. You will have a corner office, a blank check to build your own forensic department, and a starting salary triple whatever the federal task force is paying you." The offer hung in the air. It was a golden ticket. It was the ultimate validation. For 32 years, my parents told anyone who would listen that I was a glorified calculator. They mocked my career and belittled my intellect. Now a titan of industry was standing in front of their weeping faces, offering me the keys to his empire. It was the exact level of prestige Diane worshipped. Diane stopped sobbing for a fraction of a second. She lifted her head. Her smeared, tear-filled eyes locked onto me. A desperate, sickening hope flickered across her face. She thought the executive partnership was her lifeboat. She thought if I accepted the billionaire's offer, I could somehow smooth over the federal charges. She thought her proximity to my sudden elevation would save her country club membership. I looked at Marcus Sterling. I evaluated the man standing before me. He was ruthless. He was brilliant. But he operated in a world built on the same transactional leverage my family utilized. He valued me because I served his bottom line. I did not want to trade one gilded cage for another. I held his gaze. "Mr. Sterling, I said softly. "I appreciate the offer. It is incredibly generous." I let the sentence breathe. Diane held her breath, clutching the fabric of her dress. "But I must politely decline." I finished. My voice was smooth and unyielding. I am an auditor for the Joint Federal Task Force. I hunt anomalies for a living. I prefer the independence of the hunt over the comfort of a corner office. You have your corporate intelligence team. I have my badge. We are exactly where we are supposed to be. Marcus Sterling studied my face. He searched for a hint of hesitation or bluff. He found only solid bedrock. A slow, genuine smile broke across his features. It was a rare expression of pure respect. He extended his right hand. I took it. His grip was firm. "If you ever decide to leave the public sector, Miss Ward," he said, "you know how to reach my private inbox." I nodded, releasing his hand. Marcus turned and walked toward the ballroom to manage the fallout of his daughter's shattered wedding. I looked down at the wreckage of my family one last time. Richard was trembling. Diane let out a fresh wail of despair, burying her face in her hands. The lifeline she hallucinated vanished. They were entirely alone. I searched my chest for a trace of guilt. I waited for the familiar sting of obligation that plagued my childhood. The feeling never arrived. The cavity where that guilt used to reside was filled with a profound, enduring peace. I owed them nothing. Liam stepped forward, materializing from the edge of the marble pillar. He held my slate gray wool coat. He did not say a word. He draped the heavy fabric over my shoulders, settling it into place. His hands rested briefly on my collarbone, a quiet, steady reassurance. He did not ask if I was okay. He knew I was. We turned our backs on the screaming. We walked across the grand atrium, navigating the scattering remnants of the high society crowd. The guests parted, forming a wide, clear path for us to exit. We pushed through the heavy brass and glass double doors, stepping out of the stifling luxury resort. The weather had turned. The impending storm broke. A fine, cold drizzle fell from the Kansas sky. The crisp air hit my lungs, washing away the scent of expensive perfume and imported orchids. It smelled like wet asphalt and fresh earth. It smelled like freedom. We walked across the gravel parking lot. The sound of our footsteps felt loud and rhythmic in the cool afternoon. We reached our 4-year-old sedan. Liam unlocked the doors. I slid into the passenger seat, pulling my coat tight around my chest. Liam started the engine. The heater hummed to life, pushing warm air through the vents. He shifted the car into drive and pulled away from the resort. We left the wrought iron gates and the manicured lawns behind us, merging onto the winding rural highway. The trees blurred past the windows. The rhythmic swish of the windshield wipers kept time. I reached into my pocket and traced the edges of the vintage diamond ring. It was safe. The past was secured. The future was unwritten. I looked over at Liam. He kept his eyes on the road, his hands steady on the steering wheel. A small, calm smile rested on his lips. The silence in the car stretched between us. It was not a heavy silence. It was not the oppressive, suffocating quiet of holding your breath waiting for the next insult to land. It was the peaceful, unburdened silence of a woman who finally knew her exact worth. I drew my boundaries in stone and left the abusers to pay the ultimate price. The ledger was balanced. The audit was closed. The house on Maple Drive sits empty today. The manicured lawn is beginning to overgrow. The front windows reflect nothing but the quiet Kansas sky, and the heavy oak door is secured by a silver padlock installed by a commercial bank. It is a structure built of wood, brick, and 30 years of mortgage payments. But it collapsed in a single afternoon. It did not fall to a tornado or a fire. It fell because the foundation was resting on a lie. The ruin of the Ward family was not a sudden accident or a stroke of bad luck. It was the mathematical, inevitable result of a ledger that had been imbalanced for decades. Parenting is the quietest, most profound ledger a human being will ever maintain. The entries we make in the minds of our children, the boundaries we set, the truths we enforce, the fairness we model, compound over time. When we look at the wreckage of Julian Ward, stripped of his tailored suits and escorted out of a luxury resort by private security, it is easy to view him as a lone villain. But Julian was not born a criminal. He was manufactured into one by two parents who believed that love equated to endless, unearned indulgence. In the pursuit of the traditional American dream, Richard and Diane lost the plot. The culture of the modern suburb often places an unbearable weight on the appearance of success. The driveway must hold the right car. The holiday card must feature the perfect smiles. The children must serve as trophies, reflecting the parents' social standing back to the world. Diane and Richard wanted a trophy. They chose Julian to be their golden idol, placing him on a pedestal so high the air grew thin. They shielded him from the natural consequences of his actions. They praised his mediocre efforts. They funded his illusions. When you raise a child without the anchor of accountability, you do not prepare them for the world. You prepare them to be destroyed by it. Julian grew up believing the rules of gravity did not apply to him. He was taught that optics mattered more than character, that looking wealthy was identical to being wealthy, and that the people around him were merely stepping stones. His parents thought they were protecting him. In reality, they were handing him the very rope he would use to hang himself. When the shadow banking syndicate offered him a taste of unearned power, Julian took it without hesitation, because taking things he did not earn was the only skill his parents ever truly taught him. Conversely, Stella was handed the burden of reality. She was designated the family failure, the scapegoat, who was forced to exist in the shadows so her brother could shine brighter. She was denied the praise, the financial safety nets, and the fundamental warmth that a traditional family structure is supposed to provide. Diane and Richard weaponized their affection, dispensing it only when it served their narrative. They expected Stella to crumble under the weight of their rejection. They expected her to internalize the label they stamped on her forehead. But true resilience is often forged in the fires of isolation. By withholding their financial support, her parents inadvertently taught her how to build her own. By demanding she stay quiet, they taught her how to listen, how to observe, and how to spot a lie from a mile away. Stella became a forensic auditor not just by studying textbooks, but because she spent her entire life analyzing the fraudulent dynamics of her own living room. The cruelty she endured clarified her vision. She learned that honesty is not just a moral ideal, it is a structural necessity. When you build your life on the truth, no one can ever threaten to tear it down. The tragedy of this family is rooted in a profound lack of emotional awareness. Richard, playing the role of the passive enabler, chose the comfort of silence over the friction of doing what was right. He signed his name on a shadow loan to avoid a difficult conversation with his wife and son. Diane traded the genuine, unconditional love of a mother for the shallow, fleeting approval of country club acquaintances. They sacrificed their home, their retirement, and their children's futures just to maintain a fragile illusion for an audience of strangers who did not actually care about them. Raising children requires the courage to let them fail. It requires the emotional intelligence to distribute love fairly, ensuring that no child feels like a prized possession and no child feels like a disposable burden. The most critical responsibility of a parent is not to shield a child from the world, but to equip them with the moral compass necessary to navigate it. You cannot buy a legacy with stolen money, and you cannot manufacture a healthy family using deceit. When the storm eventually breaks, the only structures left standing are the ones built on solid, unvarnished truth. If you have ever felt the cold chill of being the designated outsider in your own home, or if you simply believe that authenticity is always worth the painful price of admission, you are not alone in the dark. There is a community of people who see through the polished facades and understand the heavy cost of breaking generational cycles. Join us by subscribing to the channel Elena Vengeance. We pull back the curtain on the secrets hiding behind the perfect family photos. and we celebrate the quiet strength of those who refuse to read the toxic scripts they were handed. The story of the Ward family is closed, but the echoes of their choices continue to ring out. Stella walked away from the shattered glass of the Botanical Garden Pavilion with her grandmother's vintage ring in her pocket and a steady, unburdened heart. She drove into the crisp air, leaving the wreckage behind her. But as you drive through your own town tonight, past the manicured lawns, the bright windows, and the quiet streets, pay attention to the houses. Look at the pristine facades, the freshly painted doors, and the expensive cars resting in the driveways. Behind those walls, invisible ledgers are being balanced every single day. Children are learning what to value. Parents are deciding what to hide. And somewhere, right now, a foundation is either being poured with the steady, quiet strength of the truth, or it is silently cracking under the weight of a beautiful, ruinous lie. The choice of which house we build ultimately belongs to us.